In this episode of Asay L'Charav, I had a very fascinating conversation with Rabbi Yosef Bronstein, who is a, a scholar from the Lubavitcher modern Orthodox world who spent many, many years studying the Rebbe's Torah to understand it well. And in reading his chapter about the Rebbe's opinion about Eretz Yisroel, I learned a lot. I looked up many of his Mekaimis, and I came away with a lot of interesting nuance that I didn't know before. And I think this might be very interesting to the audience of Asay L'Charav. This is a bit of a part two of our discussion about the Rebbe's Shitta and Eretz Yisroel. Part one was with Rabbi Elisha Pearl. We spoke more about the Rebbe's Shitta, understanding the Rebbe's opinion on Shleimut HaAretz. Here we get more broader into the Rebbe's opinion about living in Eretz Yisroel and the Rebbe's perspective on Eretz Yisroel. It's actually timely that we're talking about this Pikuach Nefesh in the news, in the Chabad news. There was a bit of a gilui this last week. Someone published the Rebbe's papers where it seems like the Rebbe had at least a havamina to move to Eretz Yisroel. And it's Pikuach Nefesh, the Rebbe's the kedusha and the chashivos of Eretz Yisroel come out in this discussion, and then the nuances is absolutely fascinating. But as Hashem, we'll have a third episode. We'll get into additional details in the Rebbe's shitta about Eretz Yisroel after probably the Chodesh Teves or Shvat. Hope you enjoy.
Welcome everyone to the podcast Asay L'Charav. The purpose of this podcast is to bridge the gap between Rabbanim and Mashpim and the Anash community. I am doing this with my friend Rabbi Bronstein, who is the Menahal of several Halacha and Chassidus projects.
Thank you, Levi. Baruch Hashem, is a zchus that I have the exposure to many prestigious Rabbanim and Mashpim who are often not given a proper platform. This podcast, Asay L'Charav, will give a voice to these Rabbanim and Mashpim to share their thinking, their hashkafa, chassidus, a deep dive into their backstory to help uplift the entire community.
Please consider subscribing, liking, commenting, and sharing, because that helps the algorithm bring it to more people, which changes lives and brings Mashiach.
Okay, it's a grace zchus for us to have Rabbi Yosef Bronstein, who is the Rosh Beis Medrash of Mochen Zimras HaAretz, and many other distinguished degrees, and for also Mechaber of a Sefer that when I was a Bacher, I definitely had Hana from, Rabbi Soloveitchik Shiurim on Masechtas Kiddushin. I was a big Rishim Shiurim fan. So but for this conversation, he's the mechaber of this very prestigious sefer that I'm zeicha to have, Engaging the Essence, the Torah philosophy of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And I have to say that I was researching a couple different topics, and I was told by Eli Leib Rubin from Chabad.org that on a number of these topics, there is no one that has researched them better than Rabbi Bronstein. So, for example, one of the topics that we want to get into today. So this is I feel a big asset, not just for the communities outside of Lubavitch, but also for me as a card-carrying Lubavitcher that studies the Rebbe's Torah. This gave me a very fresh and more detailed and organized, structured understanding of the Rebbe's Shitta. So, thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you, Rabbi Bassman. It's a big zchus and a kavod for me to be here. And because you mentioned our mutual friends and my teacher, Rabbi Dr. Eli Rubin, I have to say from the outset that whatever zechuyos this book has, it has a lot because of his help and the help of other Chabad scholars and Talmidei Chachamim.
Okay, Baruch Hashem. It was it's extremely refreshing, and I learned so much. And obviously people kind of know the bechlolus, but like the on the negative, we say the devil's in the details, but in the Rebbe's shittas, like, seeing the nuance, I think that's, for me, that was like really mind-opening in studying this chapter. So actually, we can probably have, I think there's like 20 chapters in this book. We can have 20 podcasts on 20 different sugyas. So specifically what I asked Rabbi Bronstein to come in for this topic is um, about, since October 7th, since Simchas Torah, the tremendous tragedy that happened to Klal Yisrael, um, everyone's become much more interested and engaged in what's happening in Eretz Yisrael, and myself as well. Despite me knowing, that Rebbe's shittis, like different interesting questions came up. For example, I had a neighbor across the street who lost a family, a cousin in October 7th, an Israeli family, not from, we were trying to be Makar with them a little bit, and we have a relationship, and they asked us why we're not putting the local federation made a Zionist sign with an Israeli flag on it. Why aren't we putting that up for October 7th and to be supportive of the state of Israel? And I was very torn by that, because it's like I wanted to really understand, and I was being told by my I had an asifa of a couple of rabbanim, and the questions the rabbanim are getting from shluchim are like, how do we balance the extreme perspectives of the Rebbe on anti-Zionism and the Rebbe Rashab and the Frierdiker Rebbe with like dealing with this practical situation, how bad is it really, and really to understand the Rebbe Shitta. So I had this supposed to have a long conversation with Rabbi Elisha Pearl on kind of the Rebbe's Shitta on land for peace and so on and so forth, and that was really geschmack. But what I wanted to kind of get into, like all the other various aspects and kind of how we view Eretz Yisrael, how we view Aliyah, how we view living in Eretz Yisrael versus Chutz La'aretz. But before we jump into that, Rabbi Bronstein, I'm just super curious, what led you to getting involved in writing this book?
What led me to getting involved writing the book? Well, the book was an outgrowth of my interest in the Lubavitcher Rebbe's Torah. What led me to the Lubavitcher Rebbe's Torah was that I grew up in a yeshiva university family. My father was Baruch Hashem worked for YU for 40 years in the Smicha program as an administrator in the Smicha program. I'm a proud product of yeshiva university, the high school, the college, the yeshiva, the kollel, graduate school, teaching there. And Baruch Hashem, Yeshiva University is a very open place in terms of hashkafa. Meaning that the main focus of the Beis Madrash is definitely Gemara and Halacha. That's the Rishimos Shiurim. But there are a lot of different Sifrei Machshava that float around the Beis Madrash and certainly float around the library. So I, Baruch Hashem, in addition to being able to learn a lot of Rav Soloveitchik Sfarim, I got interested in the writings of Rav Kook. So I started learning Rav Kook, and I was Zoka to try to learn Rav Kook somewhat seriously with some rabbeim, some professors. And then through Rav Kook, I actually got to Chabad because Rav Kook says that he drew a lot from Tanya, from the Alter Rebbe. So I had a chavrusa, and I went through Tanya twice in the YU Beis Madrash, not with Chabadsters, with friends of mine in the YU Beis Madrash who were also interested. The first time we went through it with Rav Steinsaltz's parish because I really had no idea about but what I wouldn't have been able to understand Tanya at all without some type of guide. So Steinsaltz was an amazing guide. And then slowly but surely, I was getting more involved in the world of Jewish philosophy, Jewish machshava. And I was both in the Beis Madrash and in the library. And in the library, the Sfarim of the Lubavitcher Rebbe were right next to the Sfarim of the Alter Rebbe. So I started taking up Sfarim, both primary sources, the Kutei Sikos, some Mamarim, which I tried to work through, and then also some academic works and some secondary literature trying to summarize some of the shitos. And it really just caught me. It really caught me. It was a little bit of a surprise for me that it did catch me because I wasn't coming from that world at all. But slowly but surely, the machshava grew on me. I can tell you what, I appreciated both the content a lot in terms of a lot of it resonated with me. A lot of it I really found it very, very meaningful, very eye-opening and very meaningful. And also somebody coming from the world of the Beis Madrash and a little bit of academia, I also very much appreciated the Rebbe's source-based approach to everything. That every one sikha could have 100 footnotes with 100 different makoros. That is very traceable. You could always look up the footnotes, always go back to the makoros. And it was just fascinating for me to see how the Rebbe understood a Rambam, the Rebbe understood a Gemara, the Rebbe put everything together in a very, at least for me, in a very, very unique way. And Baruch Hashem, I was looking at to be mamik to whatever extent I was able to be. And once I thought I had a little bit of a tfisa, so I tried to keep organized files. I mean, a file on Hashgacha, a file on Bitachon, and a file on Eretz Yisroel and Zionism. And then slowly but surely, I had lists of Makoros. I started teaching Jewish philosophy in YU. I asked the administration if I could teach a class on the Lubavitcher Rebbe. They were to their lishvacham. They said yes, as long as it's academically rigorous. And then I had a source packet and a course. And then from that course, it emerged the book.
Fascinating. What was the book written as like, you didn't, a lot of books have been written about the Rebbe and about the Rebbe's Torah and the philosophy. Did you see something was lacking that you wanted to complement it with your book?
Yes, to a degree. Meaning, what was lacking was the book that I would have wanted as a curious 25-year-old, as a general introduction to the Rebbe's thoughts. Meaning, I don't think this book, it really plumbs the depths of any particular topic. I think that you could write a full book almost on particular topics, and there are Chabad books about particular topics about Ahavas Yisrael. There are hundreds of pages of Chabad secondary literature about the Rebbe Shitos, about Eretz Yisrael and Zionism. But in terms of a general introduction about the different shitos of the Rebbe on different topics and how they come together to create a holistic philosophy, which then it undergirds all of Chabad's activities, that I didn't find in the market. So figured I would have appreciated such a book. So I should make an attempt to try to write it.
You refer to the Rebbe, most non-Lubavitchers refer to the Rebbe as the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Are you referring to the Rebbe just in relation to this book, or you've come to call the Rebbe your Rebbe, or like your primary teacher? I'm just curious with the choice of language.
It's a good question. I think it's more in the context of this conversation. My understanding is that this conversation is going to be heard mostly by Anash, and therefore the Rebbe is a known Rebbe. If I was speaking to a group of Breslovers, a group of modern Orthodox people, a group of Dati-Leumi people, I would say the Lubavitcher Rebbe.
Right. So, in particularly this chapter on Zionism, what would you say was the biggest chiddush for you in the Rebbe's shitta about Eretz Yisroel and Zionism?
The biggest chiddush, meaning the biggest chiddush based on earlier sources, the biggest chiddush based on my own tfisos.
Based on earlier sources, meaning what was like the biggest surprise for you in seeing, whether it was surprise in learning or in just perspective, philosophical surprise in something you didn't expect when looking into the Rebbe's opinion about Eretz Yisroel?
Something I definitely didn't expect before I started learning the Rebbe's Torah was just how he could hold two things simultaneously, which seemed to be very much in tension with each other, but I think they fit together very nicely once you go through the sources. On the one hand, the extreme chashivos of Eretz Yisrael, and I listened to some of the sichos the Rebbe gave about Eretz Yisrael. You could hear the emotions. You could really, really hear the pathos. And the Rebbe definitely gave over a sense of chashivos Eretz Yisrael in these talks. And also that together with a certain bent of right-wing politics, meaning in terms of security issues, but at the same time still being extremely global and universal in terms of where the avoda of the last generation is. Meaning, if I understand it, this very much because all this might be stereotyping other groups of Jews, but you have groups of Jews that are very focused on chashivas of Eretz Yisrael. I'm talking now in the 20th century when Eretz Yisrael became like a reality that many Jews could come to, and a place where many people have relatives, and the Medina was founded. So you have people that are very focused on the chashivas of Eretz Yisrael, and often they downgrade the importance of Jewish communities in Chutz La'aretz. The goal is to get everybody to Eretz Yisrael. There are communities in Chutz La'aretz that Rav Kook says that the same way you might skip over but de-emphasize certain parts of the Torah that aren't directly relevant for the lived experience of the people that are learning. So too, there's some communities that sort of downgrade, so to speak, or de-emphasize the chashivas of Eretz Yisrael. It's not spoken about so much, and it's understandable because it's not directly relevant for these people's lives in Chutz La'aretz. So the Rebbe was able to, on the one hand, really, really, really emphasize the chashivas of Eretz Yisrael and what's happening in Eretz Yisrael and the day-to-day living in Eretz Yisrael and the politics and the security. Maybe not politics is the wrong word, but the security and the issues of the day in Eretz Yisrael. But at the same time, have a very global, universal tendency in terms of where the Ikar Avoda is in the Darshvi in the last generation.
Right. It's interesting you mentioned the Rebbe's nuance. I think there's a letter of the Rebbe, or at least I've heard this Pikuach Shmua, that obviously the Rebbe was held very much of Rav Kook, but he felt that his writings and style of writings for someone that is not like an advanced student, it could be confusing. There's a lot of like things that can be misinterpreted. So when I'm looking at some of these concepts and musagim in the Rebbe's Torah, there's you have to really halt cup to like put together this structure, because there's at first glance there's a lot of contradictions.
I don't see them as contradictions, but I see them as tensions, meaning right. There's no contradiction between emphasizing the chashivas of Eretz Yisrael and Abbas Eretz Yisrael, and also emphasizing that perhaps the main avoda of this generation happens to be found, that happens, Pikuach Nefesh, is in Chutz La'aretz. And there's the reasons why, we make here Eretz Yisrael, and because of Biur Nitzotzos and whatever, and the Diur B'Tachtonim has to be everywhere. And there's apparatus that the Jews are Arba Kitzvos Tevel in the 20th century. So those two things, they seem to go in opposite directions, but there's no actual contradiction between the ideas.
Well, I'll give you an example of what I'm referring to. I mean, obviously not contradiction, but things that need, but like are surprising, and like, well, how do those things work together? So the one sikha that I found super interesting that I had not heard, doesn't mean that many others heard it. I haven't learned through even a strong percentage of Tyrus Menachem. So this is a sikha. This is a sikha. Tafshin Yud Beis, 1952, Achron Shel Pesach. So over there, the Rebbe is talking about how the Friediger Rebbe, even though he opposed formalizing the state of Eretz Yisrael with the UN, there's some interesting Pikuach Shmua stories about that, which you don't quote, about that process, and the Friediger Rebbe wanted reports from the UN, and someone was standing by the phone to give the Friediger Rebbe reports. I'm not sure if you've heard those tales.
I really in the book I really tried to stick to text, things the Rebbe said.
You do have one Pikuach Shmua story that I'm going to get to in a minute, but
okay.
in footnote 100. But the Rebbe over here is talking about how, even though the Friediger Rebbe wasn't supportive of that, he didn't speak out against it. Whereas maybe the Rebbe Rashab was much more aggressive, maybe like once it's happening already. So what the Rebbe says that even though we don't hold it's Aschalta de Geula, it's still part of the process of the Aschalta de Geula. And he compares it to just like the Christianity, the Muslim movement made awareness of God in the world, so it was part of the Geula process, but it's not part of the formal Aschalta de Geula. So I found that very fascinating.
Yeah, I can tell you, I was looking, I was going through these sikhos, and I was really looking for, the Rebbe clearly does not hold of Aschalta de Geula. I think that's very clear. But I was looking for trying to make a list of positive things that occurred with Hakamas HaMedina. So I think in the chapter I go through some of them, and this is towards the end. It is not directly a result of Hakamas HaMedina, but at least Hakamas HaMedina and the talking about Aschalta de Geula gets people thinking more messianically, thinking more about Yemos Mashiach. So this avenue happens, according to the Rebbe, happens to be a false avenue. But at least that talk is a positive. It creates a positive change in mindset, gets people thinking about Yemos Mashiach.
Hilchos Nida, and we're soon going to be starting Hilchos Mikvois, and you can join at any time. Schedule a conversation with the Rosh Kollel today at kollelrabbanei-chabad.org. This podcast is sponsored by Kollel L'Loimdei Dach. Revolutionize your limud chassidus. Join over 200 shluchim and anash that are taking their limud chassidus to the next level. In Koilol Olam Deidach, you have expert mashpiyim, Rabbi Asher Farkash, Rabbi Yosef Klein, Rabbi Yitzchak Coffin, numerous guest mashpiyim that learn Chassidus in a unique way, broken up by sugyas. Every 2-3 months, we take a new sugya and we dissect it from its haskalah to its avodah, level by level. For bringing on the sugya, discussing the avodah aspects of the Suda, the practical application of the Suda, schedule a conversation today with the Menal Poyel or Paltiel, and learn Chassidus like you have never done before. Right. And on that note, along the lines of the nuance and things that, again, simple me had a hard time understanding was, for example, even going back to the Rebbe Rashab and the letters of the Frierdiker Rebbe about being doiches akates and making intentional, proactive activities to bring Mashiach, and to someone that went through the Rebbe's 1980s and 1990s, like the Rebbe would be talking to Hashem and pushing and doing mivtzayim, and it was all to bring Mashiach. So it's like that nuance of not doing something like building Eretz Yisroel to force Mashiach to come versus, proactively pushing all these mitzvah campaigns that were all to bring Mashiach, and every time they ever gave dollars was to bring Mashiach closer and closer. How did you put those two things together?
I mean, I don't know if this is accurate or not, and the listeners could tell, but my sense is like this: is that what the Rebbe was pushing was traditional Torah and mitzvos, and every one of the mitzvahim is a traditional mitzvah that the Kuliyama applies in Galus or Dori Doros, and there are certain Mamari Chazal that indicate that certain mitzvos can help bring Mashiach, and mitzvos in general can help bring Mashiach, and doing mitzvos with a mindset to help bring Mashiach is definitely a positive thing. So the Rebbe's mitzvahim fit under that mindset. They were supposed to try to bring Mashiach by doing traditional Torah mitzvos. But Zionism and being Hakamas Medina, something the Rebbe felt was like being doches akates in a way that was not in the traditional Torah mitzvos mindset. In fact, there are statements from Chazal, statements from Rishonim that seem to indicate that it's a negative thing. So I think that's different in terms of the way I think about it. I hope it's accurate that Chabad and religious Zionists are the two groups that live with the Mashiach consciousness. That our mission is to try to bring Mashiach. I grew up in the yeshiva university world. You do mitzvahs because that's what Hashem wants you to do. You don't do mitzvahs to bring Mashiach. That's in the back of your mind, but it's not. And that's not really in the front of your mind. You do mitzvahs because it's your chiyuv, because that's your kasher with Hashem. And when Hashem will bring Mashiach, when Hashem brings Mashiach. What I found in the religious Zionist world, what I found in Chabad, is that everything you're doing is there to help bring Mashiach. That should be front and center in your mindset. But the difference is that for the Rebbe, what types of things are you doing to help bring Mashiach? If I understand correctly, it's all traditional Torah mitzvahs. There might be a specific formula. This mitzvah gets more emphasized. This mitzvah, the going out to the Arba Kitzvos Tevil and being Mekarev people and bringing the light of Torah to even to non-Jews. All these things are traditional Torah mitzvahs. There might be a particular formula that's fitting for the last generation, but they're all traditional Torah mitzvahs. As opposed to the religious Zionists, where it's explicit that the chashivas of Eretz Yisroel sort of goes up. It rises in significance as you get close to Mashiach. And Hakamas Medina, which according to the Ramban might have always been a mitzvah, according to the Rambam, it's unclear if it's a mitzvah or not. But that becomes a key element in trying to bring Mashiach. So that's what the Rebbe was able to differentiate between A and B. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, it kind of connects to you'll be able to perhaps shoot off names of Mefarshim better than me in the Gemara and Ksubis, but there are some of the commentaries in the Gemara and Ksubis by Doiches HaKeis. They say specifically to do in Yonei Segula and Kabbalistic things to be able to bring Mashiach. That's where you're over on being Doiches HaKeis. And that was part of the Shak Levitaria in the conversation of being Doiches HaKeis.
I don't remember off the top of my head.
Right. And I recall hearing that the initial argument of the Rebbe Rashab was being doiches akates, and then there was a lot of pushback to that, and people had a hard time understanding the nuance. So then he went into, what the kavanah is and the non-religious side and so on and so forth. But there was this initial perspective of Deiches HaKeis, but it's an interesting concept.
Also, I mean, I think in the Halachic Bays and the Parshas Re'eh and the Osafos, I think that for me that was a very clearly organized sikha about the reason, so to speak, not to jump on the Aliyah bandwagon in the 1950s. So there he says, I think it was in Rabbi Rashab, it's not up to us to go to. It's not up to us to decide when we go into Geula. It's because of our kartayim. So therefore, we have to work on traditional Torah mitzvos to be able to be zocha to be zocha to the Geula. As opposed to saying that no, one of the kartayim themselves is that we've been too lazy and complacent and staying in Galus, and we have to go back to Eretz Yisroel, and that is the ultimate tshuva, which is what religious Zionists say. Yeah.
No, I'd like to get the sikha and chelik beis, which I've never learned that sikha. It's like when something's in the Hisofis, sometimes you don't get to it. Chelik Aleph, Beis, Gimel, and Daled, those are the most popular sikhs, especially learned by young Bachrim and yeshivas. But the Hisofis of Chelik Aleph and Beis, that takes the scholars to dig up and then to to highlight. But there was this story you mentioned talking about the Deiches HaKeis on page 574. You say that while the Rebbe generally avoided associating the return of the Jewish people to the land of Israel with the imminent coming of Mashiach, at times he did argue that aspects of this return were aiding in the messianic process. Perhaps most directly in private conversations, and you quote from Rabbi Volpa and others that I guess heard firsthand, perhaps, this conversation, where the Rebbe referred to Hashem's gift of Jewish self-governance as a form of a trial run before the coming of Mashiach. Hashem wanted to test the Jewish people to see if, without the interference of non-Jews, they'd be able to establish a society that as much as possible reflected the Torah's ideals within the context and confines of an Gullus reality. It is needless to state that the Rebbe felt that on many levels the actual government of Israel was failing the test spectacularly. I thought that was really cool.
I thought it was cool also. I'll tell you the truth. I was looking, the Rebbe speaks a lot about, once the state of Israel is here, about I think the sikhos are well known, the themes are well known, not saying Aschal to the Geula, trying to be as Jewish as possible, that the state of Israel is the Yeshua, thanking Hashem for the defensive wars, critiquing what needs to be critiqued and praising what needs to be praised. But I was looking for Makoros about what did the Rebbe actually think of 1948. Was Hakamas Medina itself a positive thing or not a positive thing? So I asked around. I spoke to various Chabad Talmidei Chachamim. I think Rabbi Reuben was one of them. I think I'm forgetting who else I spoke with about this particular chapter. And it's not something I made up. I'm forgetting exactly what the Marmakum is, but it's there. I'm citing it in the footnotes that the Rebbe. It seems like, again, your listeners are probably much more familiar with things than I am, so they could correct me if I'm wrong. But he didn't really speak openly in sichos and public talks about, in 1948, what would he have done? Would he have declared a state or not declared a state? I don't know how many talks go back to that question. Is the state of Israel would he have declared a state or not declared a state? Most of the talks are about, once the state is here, what do we do with it? What should we think about it? What should we say about it? So, but I found a bunch of several makoros, either in a letter or in somebody writing up Yechidos. So I think there's a journalist who wrote up conversations he had with people who had Yechidos with the Rebbe from around that time period. And this is one of the formulations that I was able to dig up. So yeah, I thought it was fascinating. I thought also the comparison to apparatus was also fascinating for me, and the fact that it's the Ikar was Jewish sovereignty. I mean, in the sense that not as a key mitzvah of but Jewish sovereignty in the sense that Jews could be autonomous, not live under the rule of non-Jews. The more Jews could live autonomously without non-Jewish interference, the better off we are. And in one of these Yechidos says, at least in the recollections of the Yechidos, I think the Rebbe said it could have happened anywhere. But there's a special chesed of Hashem that it happened in Eretz Yisroel.
Right. Just popped into my mind. I live in Pittsburgh, so I'll tell you a Pittsburgh Zionism story that kind of shed some interesting light on on the Rebbe's nuance. So there's the famous story where the Rebbe's brother-in-law had a dinner in Lubavitcher Yeshiva, and they sang Hatikva, and he took his name off Lubavitcher Yeshiva. So you can hear all the dramatic details about that. But in Pittsburgh, probably around the same era, maybe a little bit later, um, Rabbi Posner, who was the head shliach here, Alav Shalom, in the 60s, in the 50s, in the 70s, in the 80s. So he made a dinner, and also Hatikva was sung. I mean, they ever heard about it. So he came to a Farbrengen, and he was like, he didn't even know it was going to be sung. It happened to be, it was like something, he was very uncomfortable about it. He came to a Farbrengen, he was sitting by the Farbrengen, he was like, wasn't sure how the Rebbe was going to like react. And the Rebbe came and said, gave him a l'chaim, and the Rebbe started humming Hatikva. And he was like making with his finger, it was a very a varma musar. It was
very nice. I was not familiar with that story.
So something, or we were singing some of the words of Hatikva, and he was the parts that were kosher, and he was but giving him a smile with a finger like this.
Yeah, this is one of the reasons why I really, in addition to other reasons, I really wanted to have real Chabadnikim look over the Sefer, because there's a lot of Torah Shabbat that I'm just totally not familiar with. So it's stories like this that, at least for me, add a lot of nuance and add a lot of picture, add a lot of color to the shitos.
Correct. Do you consider yourself a religious Zionist? Where do you fall into this hashkafa? If you're comfortable going there.
I'm very comfortable. I do consider myself a religious Zionist. I mean, I was born in America, made Aliyah, living in Eretz Yisroel the last 8 years. And my kids are in the Tanti Leumi religious Zionist school system.
Did any of this information, like, do you feel like defensive and have to like research your roots of your shittas and philosophies and talk to your Rebbeim about how they view this perspective? Was this research of this chapter kind of like hard for you?
I wouldn't say it was hard. I think just a little bit of background. I was to learn in the YA-based Madarish with amazing Rebbeim. Rabbi Michael Rosenzweig was my main Rebbe for Gemara. He was a Talmud of Rav Soloveitchik or Rav Bronstein. But I also studied in academic settings. Meaning I studied in graduate school for Talmudic studies, which is learning Gemara just from a more academic perspective. The history involved, what were they eating for breakfast? If we could, things like that.
What type of pipe Abaya smoked?
Exactly. And what were the Persians saying at the time? What were the Greeks saying at the time? What were the Romans saying at the time? So things like that. So you end up reading a lot of things that you just disagree with, because you have to read a lot to get through these programs. My advisor was a massive Talmud Chacham, Dr. Yaakov Elman, Alav Shalom Zatzal. He was a Talmud of Hunter, massive Talmud Chacham, but he thought very academically. He ended up becoming a professor as opposed to a Rosh Hashiva. So he knew Shas. I would say as much Baal as one can. You gave him a sugya, he would tell you the daf and how many lines went from top to the bottom. So in that process, you sort of get used to reading a lot of things that you're not necessarily you're not going to take in and make them to leave libo of your hashkafa. So some of the chapters in this book I really felt like resonated with me very deeply. And look, the Rebbe's points are all amazing, and you could trace the Makoros all the way down. And I think it's amazing. It's amazing to see. And you definitely have to wrestle with points. You have to definitely have to think things through. But I wouldn't say I had a major hashkafic crisis, and I wouldn't say that it was particularly difficult. I think I was fairly comfortable in my own thought process at this point, and at the point when I was researching it.
So you were trying to come with the Rebbe's perspective, but not Rabbi Bronstein's perspective, and analyzing the Rebbe's perspective.
I am sure that I was not 100% successful. My goal throughout this book was that the reader should not know which chapters I live with deeply and which chapters are very foreign to me as an individual person.
So this Zionism chapter was more foreign to you than some of the other chapters.
Foreign might be a strong term, but yeah, but I definitely, my personal beliefs, again, I'm not sure how much it influences the podcast or the listeners or the book, but my personal beliefs are much more in line with the mainstream of the religious Zionist community here in Israel.
Interesting.
Now, I can just tell you one point. I'm not sure if it's be interesting for your listeners or not, but let's say the Rebbe has many simanim, many indications, and that this is the last generation of Galus. Mashiach is on his way. It's a thing like Purim, Tavshin, Mem Zayin. There's like a list of like 10 of them. The Rebbe goes through like a long list. Not once is Kibbutz Galios mentioned as a siman for Geula, except when you get to the fall of the Soviet Union and Soviet Jews coming in, then he calls it a Te'ima of Kibbutz Galios. So the Rebbe, if I understand correctly, again,
did you bring that detail here?
I don't remember. At some point in the book, I feel like I mentioned it, but I don't remember per se. I understand why the Rebbe did it. The Rebbe said because Kibbutz Galios, the Rambam Paskins, happens by Mashiach. Mashiach is Mekabez Nidchei Yisrael. So until you have a messianic figure, the fact that a lot of Jews come back to Eretz Yisrael is not a chalosh shem Kibbutz Galios, to use Lamdish terminology. But just as for somebody as an outsider reading that, it was I guess it rubbed me the wrong way, or like, you know, if you go through Tanakh, one of the main indications the Mashiach is on his way of the utopian era is Kibbutz Galios, and the fact that you have 8 million Jews, I don't know how many millions of Jews, it's Kemat Rov Am Yisrael, let's say, in Eretz Yisrael, to say that because the Rambam Paskins that Mashiach has to be Mekabez Nidchei Yisrael, that the Kibbutz Galios is not happening. In a halachic sense, in a real sense, for me at least, was difficult to swallow. So I understand where the Rebbe is coming from. The Rebbe is coming from the Rambam. The Rebbe is coming from Chasidus, but I think the religious Zionist community comes a lot from Tanakh and a lot from Midrashim, and so the Makoros are different, and therefore the end result, the tefisa of what's happening in the world, is going to be different.
Right. You mentioned that discussion with the Rebbe quoting the Rambam, and you reference our Parashal Schechter's perspective and others. Just in parentheses, this is being recorded before the Kinnes HaShlochim. It's probably going to be published after, but I'm helping to arrange a day of halacha on Thursday for the Shluchim, like a rabbinical conference on halachic topics, and Herschel Schechter is coming in from 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. So he's going to be leading 3 sessions on Yuchsin and other general topics. So
that's unbelievable. He is such a Talmid Chacham, such a tzaddik, and it's such a schos that I had to learn from him and be in the same base matters with him for around 15 years, I guess, 13, 14 years. It's mamash a schos, and ashracha for organizing it.
Baruch Hashem. So. How does he handle with the Rambam if the Rebbe talks out Shiach coming first and then Kibbutz Galios? What does he do with the Rambam?
So the point I quoted Rav Schechter about in the chapter, I think, was just about the mitzvah of Sumta Samalach HaMelech. I mean, what is the gather of that mitzvah? So the Rav Schechter, I think Rav Schechter is not a card-carrying member of the religious Zionist community in Israel either.
But really?
He has
okay.
I mean, he certainly, I think, I don't know, I'm not sure how he self-defines. He certainly sees eye to eye with them on a lot of issues. But he has a piece in one of his Sfarim coming entirely from Lamdas, from Halacha, that the gather of Sumta Samalach HaMelech, of Mitzvah Smini Melech, doesn't require a Melech from Beis David, doesn't even require from government, it requires a Jewish national government. And it could be democratic. And Tzip says, Sumta Samalach HaMelech, it doesn't have to be a king, it could be any type of national government. The Tzitz Eliezer quotes this, and there are various achronim they go through this. So that's I think, if I recall correctly, that's what I quoted Rav Schechter for in the chapter, that the state of Israel is a kiyum mitzvah of Sumta Samalach HaMelech, because it is a Jewish government of Jews over a self-defined Jewish state. Even though it's clearly not an ideal government, and ideally we want a melech from Malchus Beis David. So that shita is also held by the religious Zionist community in Israel, that there's a lot of work to be done on the state, but the state itself is a kiyum mitzvah.
Wow.
I suppose, yeah.
No, it's interesting. It's interesting. It's like even the Rambam himself in those halachas makes it clear that there's aspects that are kind of undefined. Halacha doesn't necessarily define. So there's a lot of ambiguity about some of the details.
Right. And just to be clear, I think that the question of is the state of Israel messianic, kibbutz golios, I think that's separate from the question of what is the halacha geder of the mitzvah d'reisa of something Melech HaMelech. The two things can be bifurcated. Meaning, just because you have a kiyum d'reisa of something Melech HaMelech doesn't mean that there's messianic potency in the state. Doesn't mean there's kibbutz golios. Doesn't mean that it's paving the way towards Mashiach. It's just a kiyum mitzvah. And then the religious Zionists would put the two together and say, there's a kiyum mitzvah d'reisa of something Melech HaMelech, and there's kibbutz golios, and Rabbi Yehuda Kook, the Cook's son, has a line that is well known in the Zionist community. Zoli Medina shechazu bo Nevi'im. This is a state that the Nevi'im prophesies about. Then he goes on to say it's not ideal yet, but the infrastructure is there. We just have to change it or shift it to become the ideal state.
Hey, if you're listening right now and you've been feeling stuck, like you're running in circles or living on autopilot, I want to invite you to something different. I call it coaching out of the matrix, and it's about breaking free from the patterns, fears, and false limits that break you from living fully as the person God created you to be. My approach is holistic. We work on mindset, emotions, physical well-being, and a deeper spiritual identity so the change lasts. And here's the twist. You only pay if you're satisfied with the session, because I believe in results, not hype. If you're ready for a shift, email me at leviholisticcoach@gmail.com and let's see what opens up for you. That's leviholisticcoach@gmail.com. Coaching out of the matrix. Your new chapter starts right here. Enjoy the rest of the video. Hey, are you looking for top talent without the crazy costs? Well, you're in good luck, because I'm advising at Talent Sam. They help companies hire amazing people from South Africa for roles like customer success, finance, operations, marketing, and sales. All and more at around 70% less than Western employee cost. They can find the right person in days with no recruitment fee, and they handle all HR, tech, and compliance. If that sounds like something you or someone you know could use, let me know and I'll connect you. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of the video.
Interesting. Another sikha that you referenced that I found very interesting was he actually quotes a famous story of the colorful chassid, Rabbi Shmuel Munkes, a chassid of the Alter Rebbe, where the Alter Rebbe was like kind of being reluctant to take some actions on a certain thing, and the Shmuel Munkes says, if you're a real Rebbe, then you can figure it out. If you're not a real Rebbe, you should get punished for taking away my Olam Hazeh, because you took away all my enjoyment of Olam Hazeh. So it's kind of connected to that story, the Rebbe gets into this Eretz Yisroel deal, and he says, what's the problem? Yidden are going to get inspire Jews. What's the problem with, is it true? Is it not true? As long as Yidden are inspired. So the Rebbe was like making the point that it has to be accurate. You can't give people false fluff. And if he held this was not happening, you have to be honest. It was like even though we say Mashivin al Adrush, but like I guess Aval Bikain, he wanted to be very Halachic.
Yeah. But here there was a drush, the Rebbe said that it has negative consequences.
Right.
And look, a lot of the Rebbe's critiques I agree with. I mean, I think that you could always, even if you don't hold the Benishita in its entirety, the fundamental points could still be very accurate. That you can't have complacency just because the state of Israel exists, and you have to make sure that it's not just a state of Jews, but a Jewish state. And the Goyishkeit in the state of Israel is something that's unfortunately still rampant. Baruch Hashem, I think it's beginning to change, but you see it in day to day. You see it in politics. You see it in the news. A lot of the Rebbe's critiques are I feel again Lania Katan, I think is still 100% still accurate. But the general shita, I think you could still say it's a Schal Gula, even with all the critiques.
Right. So another sikha that Rabbi Bronstein led me towards, he was my mashpia and guiding me to the Rebbe's.
Not a mashpia. I'm a kli trying to organize makoros. Definitely not a mashpia.
A mashpia in the sense is just passing over the word of the Rav. So you were You did a very good job delivering. So this Sikh and Chelik Beis and Haisaf is Parshas Re'eh. So if I understood the Sikha correctly, the way you summed it up, and I looked up the original as well, the Rebbe makes 5 interesting points as to why he's not encouraging a mass aliyah movement. And if I could just summarize them, and then maybe we can go into a couple of them. The first is many opinions of the Rishonim don't hold it's a mitzvah. It's not a mitzvah chiyuvis. It's kind of a mitzvah that you get a mitzvah, but you don't have to do it. And then he quoted an interesting tashbats, which, as you pointed out to me, the Rebbe didn't quote this many times. It was something I obviously didn't hear the Rebbe say it, and it wasn't one of the common quotes in relation to Eretz Yisroel. But there's a concept in the tashbats, which is the Talmud of Miriam Rottenberg. It's letter Tov Kuf Nun Tes, where over there he has all these, the Gemara in Ksubis and all over says all these fantastical things about going to Eretz Yisroel. So he makes the point, if I can paraphrase, that you kind of have to be like a Bal Madrega to get that, and for other people it could be counterproductive. So how would you talk out the tashbats and kind of, let's say, from a Zionist perspective? Do they deal with this? How do they deal with this, like tashbats, or do they?
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't know. I've definitely seen it in Halachic discussions. Meaning, there's a shita of Tosfos and Ksubos that's I think it's Rav Chaim Cohen that says that the reason why we don't make Aliyah, one day, and Tosfos says, I hope I'm quoting this correctly, but I'm quoting from memory now. One day, and Tosfos says it's because of Sakanas Drachim. The other day, and Tosfos says we're not such bekiyin in the mitzvahs of Torah Baretz, and we're going to get onshim if we don't keep them properly. So that the Tosfos is connected with this the same Ashkenazi Bismedrish of which goes down to Rami Rinneberg and his Talmidim. It's a certain fear, a certain Yiras Shamayim, which has to go into this. And when you're in the palace of the king, when you're like Am Yisrael says to Moshe Rabbeinu in Parshas Korach, Kol Kareva Mishkan Hashem, you must. There's a certain fear the closer you get to Kedusha, because any slightest mistake could cause a big onesh. And certainly that type of fear, that type of trepidation was there in later Ashkenazi Rishonim. That you have the Ram Rinneberg often being machmir misafek. Ram Rinneberg is the one I think who says that on the second day of Rosh Hashanah, so you should have a pre chadash or a beged chadash, so you can say shakiyano in it. You want to avoid paskening. You want to be yotzei all the shitos. So there's a certain fear. There's a certain Yiras Shamayim that goes into the psak. The same thing is true about living in Eretz Yisroel. So what do religious Zionists say about it? I mean, Rav Shlomo Yisraeli, I think it's Rav Shlomo Yisraeli, is Rosh Yeshiva Merkaz Rav. He just says that Rov Rishonim are against it. I mean, the Ramban thinks it's a mitzvah d'oraisa. Rov Rishonim thinks the Pesach Yeshuva passes like the Ramban. Rov Rishonim passes like the Ramban. He thinks even the Rambam perhaps passes like the Ramban. It's all the old Dion and the Achronim. So Rov Rishonim are against it. My guess is that you'll find some people saying that these things were important, but as we get closer to Mashiach, so a lot of this fear has to go away, because the avoda of the time period is not good to come back, and therefore, when you're in Galus, you have a certain fear interpretation, but it becomes the Ikar avoda, then you have to go for it and try to live life in Eretz Yisrael as well as you can.
Yeah, it's very interesting. You mentioned earlier parallels between Chabad and Zionism in terms of the Mashiach. So, in terms of, like, let's say the approach to learning Pnimius HaTorah, Chassidus,
right.
So there was a similar concern in previous generations. You have to have certain preparations, and not everyone's roy for it. So you're making a similar argument to the argument that the Alter Rebbe and the Balatanya, and particularly later generations, spreading Chassidus to everyone, even beginners. It's kind of like it's a preparation for Mashiach, and B, it's needed because we're Der Yosim and we need all the extra inspiration we can get.
I mean, I don't know how deeply you want to get into this, but Rav Kook often has these things that again, Rav Kook is not radically changing Judaism. Rav Kook will say things similar to the Rebbe, that different generations have different emphasis of avoda, and he says the emphasis of avoda in Eretz Yisrael is more embracing of Gashmius, embracing of the Olam Hazeh, in Chutz La'aretz, in Galus, so then the only thing you have is not Amash Halacha. You have pure Ruchnias. Everything on the outside is neutral or negative. But as you get closer to Gula, Eretz Yisrael itself is described as Eretz Kavas Kavod Zabash. All the brachos and Bechukosai are about a lot of them are about the Gashmis of Eretz Yisrael. And he applies the Hasidic principles that in Eretz Yisrael you're able to see how even the Gashmios is really an expression of divinity. But that's a messianic mindset which you're only zocha to fully in Eretz Yisrael. So it's similar to what the Rebbe did. The Rebbe did it all over the world. Rav Kook was doing it dafka in Eretz Yisrael.
Fascinating. You'll have to excuse my ADHD. I'm a little jumpy, but the talking about collaboration between Chabad and other kehillas. So I had the schus to be part of. I'm not sure if you heard of Smichas Chaver. It's
For sure.
About the Goldwicht. So myself and my friend Rabbi Ram Jacks, about 5 years ago, we created with Rabbi Goldwicht the Chabad branch, taking the Smichas Chaver.
Oh, wow, that's so nice. That's nice.
It's in about 50 Lubavitcher communities, emphasizing the opinions of the Alter Rebbe and the Rabbeim and Chabad custom. So Punk this man, we're a year behind the regular non-Chabad Smichas Chaver. So we're doing Hilchas Tzedakah, and we're just seeing interesting parallels in Machshava, where we say Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam. The Baal HaTanya says nowadays that we're before the generation of Mashiach, the Ma'is is much more emphasized. And I was pointing out to the students that the Nefesh HaChaim says the same exact thing in the Sefer Nefesh HaChaim, which is talking about the grade and the importance of Torah. What does he say? He says the same thing, that even though Torah is so important, we're in a Dor Maisa and so on and so forth. So there's always we're much more similar than people think.
I'll definitely say l'chaim to that.
Okay, so the Rebbe says not all opinions. You're saying majority would say. I do remember that the name Chaim Cohen and the Tais was over there. The Ram Ruttenberg about need a kind of being ready for Eretz Yisrael, whether it's just the mitzvahs or it's the general energy. You have to be connected to that. It's interesting, and you also reference this. This is based on Likutei Torah, a common theme, where Eretz Yisrael, as spiritual and as lofty as it is, it's viewed as a taking the spiritual and kind of where the rubber hits the road in terms of dealing with the physical world. Whereas maybe like Bovel, that you reference that Sicha and Chelik Yates and Parshas Maseh, where that Bovel maybe is. I'm curious when we say that Eretz Yisrael is the hislabshus into physicality, and whereas the Midbar was less distractions, would Chutz La'aretz or Bovel versus Eretz Yisrael be more hislabshus or less hislabshus? How did you see that?
I don't remember 100%. If I recall correctly, the Rebbe says that this notion of seeing HaKadosh Baruch Hu through the physicality, it's more apparent in Eretz Yisrael. So I don't know if that means it's more in an ontological sense, it's deeper in Eretz Yisrael, if that's even possible. But he definitely, if I recall correctly, he definitely has Lashanos that it's more apparent in Eretz Yisrael. Therefore, it's easier to do Avodah B'Gashmios and still be connected and still have B'chol V'Chakateo, Kol Masaka Yil Shem Shemayim, or the opposite, Kol Masaka Yil Shemayim, B'chol V'Chakateo.
You need to make a heter iska for your electric bill, so you meaning everything's connected to Torah in a much more direct way.
I don't think that's really. I think you meant like you were quoting about the Baraglim, that even the avodah sakarka in Eretz Yisrael, you could see how even the physical avodah, even the tefua and the grain, the fact that there are halachos about them is reflective of the fact that the divinity of everything is more apparent in Eretz Yisrael.
Right. And then the Rebbe says about we need to refine our levushim before we go. That's, I guess, similar to point 2, the Rashbatz. And then the Rebbe emphasizes that without tshuva, even when you're living in Eretz Yisrael, it's still the avira of Chutz La'aretz. So at the end of the day, the focus is to do tshuva and to get closer. And in his opinion, the kind of the physical traveling is secondary. And then there's the hashgacha pratis of where you are. That's where you need to do your shlichus. Even in other words, even if naniach reason 1 through 4 are out the window, you have your shlichus. This is where you need to be. That's your avodah, and you got to finish that before you get your dessert in Eretz Yisroel.
Right.
Is that the fifth point?
I think so. I don't remember all of them in order, but I think it's connected with this notion that Galus and Gula is not about a physical location. It's about a tfisa. It's about a mindset. It's about how connected you how connected you are to Kadosh Baruch Hu. So if you haven't finished your avoda in Galus and you're still in the inner Galus, and you go to Eretz Yisrael, you're not accomplishing. You're not accomplishing anything. Maybe you're accomplishing something. You're not accomplishing the real. Not accomplishing the real avoda. And the Rebbe has these, it's Lashonos, like you're taking the Avir of Chutzlar, it's Avir of Galus, with you to Eretz Yisrael. So it's a physical relocation, but it's not a spiritual elevation.
Right, right. Talking about merging these concepts of like Likutei Torah with the Rebbe's thinking. So was your journey in the Rebbe's Torah or kind of the Rebbe's Torah as part of the whole Chabad library? I know that would make the research a lot harder because instead of just dealing with 200 books, you're dealing with 400 books. But how did you see that? Because it's seven, the seventh Rebbe, coming after six Rebbes.
So this was one of the very valid critiques of my book, and I think it is valid that I by no means at all am I a baki or claim to be a baki in any of the Torah, in Chabad in general. My journey in Chabad was basically the Alter Rebbe and then the Rebbe, and I looked up things in footnotes and some of the key things in the Rashab. I went through more Keseder as much as I could, but it's not like I spent a year going through Tafar Islamic Vav or anything or Tafar Shayin Days or anything of that sort. And that's definitely a chisaron, and that's another reason why people like Rav Eli Rubin were very, very helpful for me and very essential that I consulted with them. Not always that I listed in my gaiva, and I can speak to Eli about that, but it was very important for me to hear them out because they had more access to the entire Masorah. As opposed to me. I looked at things in footnotes. I think the Rebbe was quoting, I definitely looked up. There's a difference between looking things on the footnotes and actually spending years going through some Tzaddik, the Rashab, Marash, and from Marash, Rashab, the Frierdiker Rebbe, and then going down to the Rebbe. So in theory, somebody writing this book really should have gone through everything. I guess I had a little bit of Asos Kedusha, a little bit of impatience, youthful impatience, and I jumped for it without the proper background.
How long did you spend working on this book?
It's hard to say. I spent years just learning the Rebbe's Torah on my own, and then trying to organize this class that I taught in YU, and then the actual process of sitting down and writing. It was basically, I had the basic text after 2 years.
From when you started learning through the course, through writing, how long was that? Was that a decade?
I would, close to a decade. Close to a decade, I would say. But the 2 years of writing were much more intensive. And then there was a long process of editing, both with Koren and with Chabad Hamid Chamim, which took some time.
This podcast is sponsored by Koilel Aliba de Hilchasa, a brand new Koilel with the Rosh Koilel, Rav Yaakov Goldstein, Skan Rosh Koilel, Rav Menachem Rottenberg, Menal Poyel, Rav Mendel Weisfish, all active, experienced, Moida Hayra. Follows an 8-year syllabus. Every 6 months is a new topic, broken up into subtopics. Until Pesach, we're learning the halachas of Hilchas Avelus and Bikur Cholim. After Pesach, we're learning workplace halacha, Hilchas Ribis, Hilchas Baltolin, and Hilchas Yichud. It's a serious learning Gemara, Shulchan Aruch inside. 3 hours a week of Chavrusa learning. Help find you a Chavrusa, set up a Chavrusa. And then there's 2 in-depth shiurim per week, 2 live shiurim per week. and it's serious learning. Someone that has a busy schedule, 3 to 5 hours a week. Schedule a conversation with a Manal Poyel today at koilelad.com. This podcast is sponsored by Smichas Chaver Chabad, Halacha U, and Women's Halacha Circle. In over 100 communities around the world, Halacha for everyone. Halacha curriculum that we provide for your community to teach the halachas, to engage people in halacha, to make halacha interesting. We have Smichas Chaver Chabad for Anash communities. For those that have a yeshiva background, we have Halacha U, which are advanced courses being taught in Chabad houses around the world. For those that don't have a yeshiva background but want serious, roll up your sleeve learning, super engaging, take them through the journey of the halacha down to the super, super practical. Every 6 months is a new topic. After Pesach, we are starting the sugya of workplace halachas, the laws of ribbis, the laws of baltolin, paying your workers on time, and the laws of yichud. Fascinating sugyas. We have it on various levels for those that have a yeshiva background, those that don't have a yeshiva background, for women as well. Check out scpchabad.org or halachau.org. Click join to schedule a meeting with me to learn more. I do want to get to some examples of where you and Eli Leib disagreed, but do you find yourself still continuing to learn the Rebbe's Torah, or was kind of like that was an academic project and you're now back to Reb Cook, and in other words?
No, I still do learn the Rebbe's Torah. I can't say I learn as much as I would like. Right now, Baruch Hashem, I'm teaching, I'm writing. It's a big success to be involved in these things. And from this year, I'm not really teaching Chabad. Last year, I was teaching a little bit once a week shir on the Lubavitcher Rebbe Torah, so I was much more involved. I was definitely learning a decent amount every week to prepare. But this year, I'm not. So on Shabbosos, I try to pick up a sicha. But I can't say that I'm immersed. But I do hope that somebody asks me to be able to, I don't know, to teach, to learn some Chabad Torah. So I'll be able to get back into it.
Right. Well, thank you for this.
Well, thank you. Really, thank you for the opportunity. I really did not think my book would be of interest to people in Chabad. I thought I was writing primarily for people with people of my background who would want access points, would want a general introduction to the thought of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. But if people who grew up in Chabad yeshivos find it useful or helpful, or even as a foil, what this person wrote is totally wrong, but at least it gets them thinking. Then
another honorable mention is the last chapter on the Mashiach issue. I thought you did a fabulous job of.
Oh, thank you.
That was. I told my 15-year-old son, my oldest boy, I said, I lived through those years and, a lot of, let's say, call it Chabad trauma. I said, Rabbi Bronstein did a good job summarizing both sides of the coin. And I think if you want to get an honest perspective of both sides, it's an interesting, I've never seen anyone summarize it that way. Really, really good job.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
So let us conclude with this letter of the Frierdiker Rebbe that is probably one of the more famous stories of kind of the Machda Eretz Yisroel piece, story of the Tzemach Tzedek. But there's one line in there that, I guess I just found very interesting, or maybe a little hard to understand. Where in that story where he's saying, he wants to go to Eretz Yisroel, and he said Machda Eretz Yisroel, the story with the Tzemach Tzedek, and he references that Reb Hillel Paritcher doesn't want to go to Eretz Yisroel, so why do you need to want to go to Eretz Yisroel? It was almost like, I guess should we be wanting to go to Eretz Yisroel? In the Rebbe's thinking, how do we put together the numerous times in davening that we're asking for Mashiach and we want to be there versus the I didn't. What does it mean that Reb Hillel Parcher didn't want to be in Eretz Yisroel? It's like so many tzaddikim. Did you have any idea what that means?
More than anybody else. I mean, my guess is that he meant practically. And practically speaking, he didn't make Aliyah. So why should you make Aliyah? Meaning, I think what you're expressing is definitely accurate. Meaning, I think that any Frum Jew, if with the Zionist, Chabad, a Shkafalist Frum Jew, would also, everybody should have a desire to go to Eretz Yisrael. And the Rebbe says, what's the definition of Mashiach? It's a full restoration of the Torah. I think that's one of his agdaros in the Rambam. That on a nigla level, the definition of Yemos Mashiach is a full restoration of the entirety of the Torah, the entirety of the Halachic system. So the same way we all have she'ifos for the rebuilding the Beis Hamikdash to be able to bring karbanos and do all those mitzvos, we also have she'ifos. I think every Frum Jew should have a she'ifa to go to Eretz Yisrael, should have a desire to go to Eretz Yisrael. Question is, what's practical? What's a practical desire, and what's a desire that I have a ratzon to do it, but I realize that it's not my avodah right now.
Right.
Meaning, in theory, I think Rav Tzvius Kalisher wanted to bring karbanos. Makrivan al fishin bias. So, I mean, there are lots of halachic issues involved, but I think the ratzon is there, just a practicality. I mean, it's not the right time. It's not that we don't have the circumstances as such that we can kind of those mitzvahs. When Mashiach comes, we'll be able to keep halacha fully, to the full restoration of the Torah.
Right. You probably heard this story, but on Jammer was one recently released, where one of the rabbis in America, the popular rabbis, I'm not sure which one of the big names, could be one of the OU presidents. So he was in his younger years, he was consulting with the Rebbe where to go, and he got a shteller in Eretz Yisroel. So the Rebbe almost told him that if you go to Eretz Yisroel, you'll just be one Talmid Chacham amongst thousands of others, and your influence will be very limited. But being a Talmid Chacham in a small city in America, or wherever he was, it wasn't just for the Kehillah where you can have more of an influence. For yourself, you'll be more inspired to want to do more, and you'll feel more impactful. It almost seemed like from a self-confidence perspective, I think you'll be happier here because you'll be doing something. That's kind of in line with the Rebbe's idea of there's still a lot of work to do.
Right. And I think the Rebbe said not just there's a lot of work to do. The Ikar Avoda is in the Tachtonim Shabbat Tachtonim, which is not Eretz Yisrael. It's Chutz La'aretz.
Right. So if you we were to close with a message for our listeners, and what would you what would come to mind?
What would come to mind? Wasn't planning on being a mashpia, but I think that at least for me, one of the overall takeaways from the Rebbe's thought is the concept of bittul, Mesiras Nefesh. And as we know, the bittul is ultimately to Kadosh Baruch Hu, but the Rebbe also has a notion of bittul to Am Yisrael, sacrifice being most nefesh to Am Yisrael. This is what the Rebbe discusses in Bas Ligani Tavshani Bala, the first speech, about being most nefesh for Am Yisrael, being most nefesh for individual Jews, and being most nefesh for Am Yisrael. And when I'm just living here in Eretz Yisrael and I see the Mesiras Nefesh that people have for each other, the soldiers have, the families have, the neighbors have. Eitan Moore, one of the hostages, he was just released. They drove him by Beit Shemesh on his way back from the hospital to where he lives in Kiryat Arba. So the entire city went out to the highway to greet him. And one of my kids was like, one of my kids thought that they were going to greet all the Chatufim. So when he saw the car, there was only one person there. My 7-year-old was like, it was one Chatuf, and that's it. Yeah, this is what Am Yisrael is. One Chatuf. The entire city is going to come out, as many people as possible to come celebrate, to come greet him. So I think a lot about the Lubavitcher Rebbe's Torah, about the notion of bittul to Am Yisrael, Mesiras Nefesh to Am Yisrael, feeling connected to Am Yisrael. And it's something that I see resonating. So something I see happening here, and something that I see that it's just growing. It's just the amount of Mesiras Nefesh people have for each other, and the amount of chesed that's being done, the Mesiras Nefesh for Am Yisrael. I think the Rebbe's messages, the Rebbe's Torah, is something that speaks to people, particularly here in Eretz Yisrael, for this reason. People are already living it, people are already doing it. The Rebbe's Torah just inspires you to do more and gives you a language, gives you makoros, gives you a way to think about it. That we're not just living as individuals, we're living as part of a klal. And as a klal of Am Yisrael, we're living for the sake of Gula of the entire world, ultimately for the sake of Kadosh Baruch Hu. And that's something which I think many people in Eretz Yisrael feel very viscerally. And that's one of the reasons I feel like the Rebbe's Torah is just becoming more increasingly popular here in Eretz Yisrael among all the chugim, among all the groups, because this is something the Rebbe spoke about and the Rebbe embodied.
Okay. I appreciate your time and your wisdom. I would encourage everyone to check out Engaging the Essence, the Torah Philosophy of the Lubavitcher Rebbe by Rabbi Dr. Yosef Bronstein. Thank you for your time, and Hatzlacha Rabbah.
Rabbi Bronstein, thank you so much. I really appreciate you. I really appreciate you reaching out to me as a non-Chabad, not a card-carrying member of Chabad. If anybody needs any ha'aros on what I said or on the book, please definitely feel free to reach out to me.
How would they connect with you?
Email is the best way, yzbronstein@gmail.com.
Okay. I think this is our first non-Lubavitcher mashpia on the Asay L'Charav podcast. So you're
definitely
you
not
can add to your
mashpia.
resume. You are now at least we called you a Chabad mashpia on the Asay L'Charav podcast.
It's certainly unworthy of a title. A collector of makoros. Let's put it that way. That's what I tried to do.
Okay. Thank you for educating me, and I'm sure many others gained as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed listening to our podcast. Don't forget to subscribe, like, comment, and share to help bring it to more people, which brings Mashiach. And if you want coaching that actually shifts you, just reach out to me at labialisticcoach@gmail.com. See you in the next video.